Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.
Welcome to Great Taste. I'm Steve Boss, and very, very happy that you joined us. Very thrilled to welcome Susan Herrmann Loomis to our show. She's the author of many books, but her latest book is Plat du Jour. Susan, I hope I said that okay. French Dinners Made Easy. She is a cooking teacher. She had her own cooking school. We're going to learn a little bit more about that because things may have changed a little bit over the last number of months. She is very, very connected with food producers. She is very engaged with understanding the need for sustainable agriculture and for the need to support local farmers and purchase local foods and to eat, as you would expect somebody who lives in France for the last 20 years or so, to be someone who cooks with the seasons. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you, really.
Well, it's
all the high points.
It's going to be fun. I would love for you to, before we get into the book, I'd love for you to just give people a little bit of an insight into, I have your first book that you wrote, En Route Tatin.
Actually, I have to say that's like my sixth book.
Whoa, okay. Sorry about that.
But it's okay. It's the book that remains active and people keep calling me and saying, I just read your book. So I'm okay if people think it's my first book.
Okay, well, it's an excellent book. Thank you for writing it. And in it, you talk about your story. You talk about how you came to be so in love with food and how your journey in France began. I'd love it if you'd share that with us.
Well, it's funny because I was a journalism major in college and I got out of school, worked for newspapers, worked in public relations, and hadn't found my real sweet spot in the work world. And I spent all my free time reading about food, experimenting recipes, cooking for friends, reading travel things. And it occurred to me one day, I'm reading about this stuff. I can write about this stuff. I'm a writer. Mm-hmm. So I decided that's what I wanted to do, but I needed to move to France and learn how to cook first. Mm-hmm. For me, I lived in Seattle, so it was either France or Japan. But because those are two really technique heavy culture mm-hmm. cuisines. But I had studied French and I thought, of course, I'll go to France. So I got a job as an apprentice at a cooking school where I worked in exchange for the education. So I went there. We were a group of 10 or 12 and it revolved and we did everything from doing the shopping to washing the dishes to gutting the mackerel to peeling the garlic, you name it. It was amazing. And I had intended to go through the 10-month program, get my diploma, and return to the US and become a food writer. But I fell in love with Paris food, France, broccoli, whatever. Actually, not broccoli. There was no broccoli in France. And spinach was one of my big moments. So I ended up, luckily, I worked for Patricia Wells at that time, and we've been friends ever since. That was, I don't even want to say how long ago that was. It's like 2 generations ago. And I got a job. I opened a little cafe. And then I ended up staying for 4 years. And all I wanted to do was stay. I came back to the US for 10 years, got married, etc. Moved back in 1993. By then I had a husband and a son. And we bought a 400-year-old former convent, small, restored it. And that's where I opened my cooking school. So I just lived food. I still live food. I live farms. I live food. I mean, I've written 3 books about farmhouse cooking, visited farmers in 3 different countries. I'm obsessed with the connection between the grower and the consumer. And my whole life is devoted to trying to make that connection smaller, shorter, more immediate. Everything I do is based on that. And in the meantime, I get to go to lots of wonderful restaurants. And now, of course, I feel that many people feel the way I do. I mean, it's very trendy now, the farm to table movement, the whole producer thingy. Unfortunately, it's more trendy than it is available to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But in France, it's available to everybody. It's always been this way. So I think I got to France and I realized, this is my lifestyle where I can go to the market, put my money in the hands of the person who actually produced my food. It's a connection I understand. It's a system that is simple. And so for me, for my personality, it just restores me every time I do this.
Mm.
And I've tried to communicate that to my students who came to my cooking school I had the cooking school for 20 years. And once my kids left home, I realized there was more I wanted to do. And it, of course, I don't even want to talk about the pandemic, but it kind of coalesced. So I now live in Paris, France. My home is rented to the mayor of the town where I used to live. And I'm teaching online and trying to get my message across through a website called dancingtomatoes.com. So it's a love affair that never ends, the love affair with France and food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into the book, but since you brought up Dancing Tomatoes, tell us a little bit about Dancing Tomatoes. What makes it so much fun?
Well, it's a funny thing because we were confined here very seriously in France, where we had 1 hour a day that we could go outside. Mm-hmm. So I was in this little apartment in this apartment building, and I haven't been here long. I didn't know people, but and everybody fled. But there were 2 apartments with people in them. So I made cookies and I put a bag of cookies in front of each apartment. And I said, we're stuck here. Here are some cookies. They're safe. You won't get COVID from them. My name is Susan and blah, blah. Well, I got to meet my neighbors. And one of my neighbors, he and his husband his husband owns art galleries. He's a fashion designer, videographer. So we didn't see each other. But, one day they left a book in front of my door. Then I left a cake, and then they left a cake. And we kept doing this, mm-hmm. sending WhatsApp messages. We developed a WhatsApp group. And when we actually got to meet each other, we had so many things in common. Mm-hmm. So the Sami, he's from Finland, and he and I decided to do this project together because there we were. He had no work. All of his fashion shows, all of his videography projects were on hold. Mm-hmm. I started ghostwriting, but all my classes were on hold. And it's like, well, wait a minute. We don't have to be on hold. We can create something cool. So that we've been working on it now since quite a while, but we just went live maybe 6 weeks ago. And, we're both professionals in our field, but we're amateurs at this. And it is the most fun. So what I'm trying to do, I'm the talent of this, and we're trying to bring people with us as I'm teaching fundamentals, all kinds of things. We're trying to take people out into Paris to meet cheesemakers and wine sellers. And, as we become inspired, we try to grab whatever we can. And we've got huge plans, but some of which are limited still for the moment because we can't travel the way we would like to. Mm-hmm. But that will open up soon.
It sounds very exciting, and I can't wait to actually experience it. So I'll be diving into that channel very, very shortly. So that's dancingtomatoes.com, and it's on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So I read somewhere, I can't remember what article it was in, some insight that I thought was just amazing. And that was that your first memory of France was the scent of butter. Really?
To me, when I get off an airplane at Charles de Gaulle and I get in whatever transport takes me to the city, I get out of the whatever it is in Paris and I smell butter. But of course I do, because I arrive at 6:00 in the morning. Every baker has just put in their croissant, pain au chocolat, baguette. So the ovens of Paris are sending out these billowy aromas of butter. Mm. And it is the most heartwarming thing. It's like, oh, I'm home. It smells like butter. So what do I do first? You know, when I lived in Normandy, I had to catch a train to get home. So I would always go to a bakery, get a fresh croissant and a coffee. And that was my homecoming. I think France smells like butter.
I tell you, Susan, you can't see it, I don't think, but my eyes are tearing up because it's such a joy to hear you communicate this, be able to really describe the essence, for you anyway, and for me for sure, of what it's like to be in this particular country, in this particular city, and to experience it viscerally. And so it's such a delight. When
You know, even now, it's like in this neighborhood, but I used to, you know, in Louviers, where I used to live, I would go to the bakery early, take the kids to school, and it's really early. And I'm coming back and I'm looking at the bakers and thinking, you know, I go get my baguette. They got up at 3 a.m. just for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're working since 3 a.m. Mm-hmm. And what do? I go and I buy fresh bread or a fresh whatever. And I just think, what a privilege every single day.
Yeah, it's no doubt. Yeah, no doubt about that. So I'm gonna just one more digression, and then I promise we're gonna talk about the book. But I have a thing. I don't know. I don't remember what the right word is right now. I think it's like it's a sore point with me. And there's one French dessert cookie that I particularly I like. I don't discriminate. I like almost any French dessert that you'd probably put in front of me. But there are cookies that are known. They have a name, that Macaron. And there are a number of bakeries that are very famous that sell macaron, like La Durée, for example, Pierre Herrmann, other people. And in the States, I hear people all the time calling Macaron macaroons. And I would just love it if you would just very clearly, if you don't mind, delineate the difference between macaron and macaroons so that every consumer that listens to this will be able to, when they walk into a bakery and somebody says we have macaroons and they're macaron, they can say, oh no, I think those are macaron instead of macaroons, which I look at that as the same way I would look at when somebody tells me that they have bruschetta on the menu, because what they really meant is that they have bruschetta on the menu. And so macaron, macaroon, very different. Please.
Very different. And, we talked about this a little bit before, but macaron, which is a beautiful little puffy almond-based cookie with some kind of cream filling. They're little, beautiful, delicate Marie Antoinette kind of cookies, are nothing to do with the macaroon, which is made with coconut. So I can take or leave a macaron, honestly. I can appreciate why people love them. And there is one flavor I like made by Pierre Hermé, and it's passion fruit filled with dark chocolate. Now that makes some kind of sense to me. But when somebody says to me, oh, I just made macaroons, I'm like, oh boy, coconut. And they're not. They're talking about macaron. So a macaron is made with crushed almond flour and egg whites and sugar. Very, very sweet, which is why they're not my favorite cookie. And it's filled with usually a ganache or whatever filling somebody wants. You can fill them with anything, jam or whatever. A macaroon is egg whites, coconut, lots of sugar too, but it's got that coconutty thing. So then they're usually formed in a mound of some kind. And then I make these sometimes for Christmas. And then when they're baked, you dip the bottom in chocolate. And so two totally different things. One is kind of rustic and artisanal, the macaroon. The macaron is dressed up for a party.
Thank you so much for indulging me. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Let's talk about plat du jour, French dinners made easy. So the book is dedicated to your mother.
Yeah.
Would you like to explain?
My mother is going to be 100. And she my sisters and I once, we're a big family. We traveled all over the world because my dad was in the military. So once I got together with my sister, I said, let's do a family cookbook. So we're putting our heads to it. And it's like, we can't do a family cookbook because mom never made anything more than once. So she had like 4 recipes she might have made a couple times. My mother loved to cook. And we lived in different places and she would explore the cuisines, and she was very much by the book, recipes and all that kind of thing. But, you know, I who love kind of pure flavors and things, like my mom would make hamburgers and she put all these flavors. I'm like, God, why can't we just have like plain hamburgers? Her food was wonderful. And she's still, well, she isn't cooking today, but as of 2 months ago, she was still cooking. And she's fine. I mean, she's right there, but it's hard for her to cook. But when I call her, which I do all the time, we spend an hour. And what do we talk about? We talk about food. So, of course, I dedicated my book to my mother. She was my first preparer of plat du jour.
So that leads me into, can you just please explain to us what that means?
Plat du jour, the literal translation is dish of the day. And it is a wonderful concept. And it is a concept upon which the French culinary world revolves, because it is the dish that represents what is seasonal at that moment. So let's just say it's the dish that was born on the farm. So the farm wife cooked every day, twice a day. What did she cook? She cooked what was in her garden, what was in her, what they call the basse-cour, the farmyard, whatever was most abundant and most available. So the chef today does exactly the same thing. He or she, usually he, many, we're still fighting to get women in kitchens, goes to the market, and like right now, what's in season, root vegetables, leeks, cabbages. So plat du jour is going to involve those ingredients because they're seasonal. They offer the most flavor. They're the most economical. They're inexpensive at this moment. And that's going to be either combined with beef or pork or lamb, or it's going to be turned into a stew or gratin, something like that. So plat du jour, many of them are dishes we know and love, like boeuf bourguignon. And they warm the soul. They are familiar to people. They speak to people. There are some that are new, that are contemporary. There's one that I love that's monkfish poached in clarified butter with white beans. Mm-hmm. Now that is served for 3 months a year when the beans are in season and they're fresh. So a plat du jour is like a map of the seasons, and it's always going to be very reasonably priced. And it's part of something called a formule, which is a menu. So a plat du jour is the main course, but you can get a plat du jour. Let's say you get a plat du jour for 17 euro. It will include either a first course or a dessert. Not both, one or the other. But there might be a side dish that just comes with it, and you might get a little appetizer that's just thrown in, and you'll always get a glass of wine and usually a cup of coffee. Mm. So it's a really good deal. Mm. And the variety is huge because every bar, cafe, brasserie, they have to change every day. Mm. Plat du jour. So it was, it's an idea that came to me as I moved to the city and realized, how this is the embodiment of all that farmhouse cooking that I know and love so well.
So the book is divided into numerous parts, as most books are. And I kind of want to start at the end, in a sense, because I want to start with your chapter on basics. Because yes. I think that's a really, it's so important for people to have foundational knowledge. And we can't cover, obviously, everything that's in there, but maybe you could pick out one or two things. I mean, to me, when I was looking at them, bechamel, mayonnaise, the bread dough that you have in there, the recipe for fromage blanc, just something to give people an idea of, what these basic building blocks are.
Thank you for asking that. I think basics are vital to cooking. And my basics, if you have good basics, it's like if you have good ingredients. If you have good basics, your food's going to be great. So even in Dancing Tomatoes, we have a section called Fundamentals, which we'll have in our to be paid for cooking class. So important. So in this chapter, bechamel it's a mother sauce. It's a basic sauce. This version to me is the best bechamel. It's silken, it's rich, it's buttery tasting. Anything you do with this bechamel is going to be fabulous because you've got a great base. I put a recipe in here for fromage blanc because it is such an essential part of cooking here. It's just an essential ingredient. And I thought, well, why would I tell people to use cottage cheese? It's not cottage cheese. It's the same. It's hard to explain, but anyway, I put a recipe in here. I mean, cottage cheese is made of curdled milk, so is fromage blanc, but they're very different. And the recipe is simple. It's very simple. So I wanted people to have the tools at hand to be able to make the recipes that I asked them to make.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Is this something, the book itself, is it easily adaptable? In other words, for people in the States, when they read and they buy your book and they read the recipes, is it something that they'll be able to, easily access all the different ingredients?
Well, that's another thing I have to keep in mind because I live in a paradise of being able to get anything, anytime, anywhere, as long as it's in season. Mm-hmm. I know not everybody can do that. So the ingredients in here are simple. You can get them at your local corner. I don't know what you have in the US, local corner hypermarket. I don't know. But, I want you to go to the farmer's market if you can. That's your first stop. But the ingredients in here are simple. And I really kept that in mind. And if there is an ingredient like fromage blanc, I teach you how to make it.
Mm-hmm. And I noticed that when you talked about ingredients, I think if I'm characterizing it properly, basically you're telling people, look, buy the best ingredients you can afford to buy. Right. It's somewhere you don't want to skimp, but do it for whatever works for you. And there were several ingredients that you listed that I kind of got, I like that a lot too. It's like bay leaves was one of them that you made, that was really a part of, these basics. And I can't even use bay leaves enough, it seems like. And so I would love it if you just talk a little bit about bay leaves. And then after that,
if God were an herb, he'd be a bay leaf. I'm serious. Bay leaves to me are the essence of French cooking. And, of course, for 30 years, I had a huge bay tree in my garden. Even today, I have a neighbor in Paris, France, who has a bay tree. And a little secret is that the Jardin de Luxembourg has bay trees in it, and nobody's going to miss a leaf or two. But there, it's a leaf, and it's the Laurus nobilis. You've got to use that variety. It's the Turkish bay leaf. It's not the California bay leaf. So it's a leaf that adds, it's like perfume to your food, not icky perfume, but it gives a basis of flavor that is so elemental. So when I boil potatoes to make mashed potatoes, I add a bay leaf. When I make any stock, I add a bay leaf. I don't add 1,000 bay leaves. I don't want to overdo it. Any soup I make has bay leaves. Any stew I make has bay leaves. When I steam fish, I don't do it all the time. I don't want to overdo it, but I'll line the steamer with bay leaves. So the fish has that wonderful flavor. It's floral without being sickening in any way. I love bay leaves. And if you don't have them fresh, you can buy them dried. They're called Turkish bay leaves. If you live in any kind of climate where trees grow, you can probably grow your own. Mm-hmm. They grow like weeds.
That's great. And another ingredient that I appreciated your going into was salt, because as you said, there's salt and there's salt. And most people, I believe, still don't understand the distinction. So please help us out.
Well, I'm devoted to sea salt, and I'm devoted to sea salt from the town of Guérande, which is on the southern part of Brittany. And the producers there pay me nothing to say this, but I have done a lot of reporting on them. And I also taste sea salt all the time. So gray sea salt from Guérande, I think, is the best thing ever. And what I like about it is it's pure. It's basically evaporated seawater. So it's not treated. It is not processed. The only thing it's done is sifted. And what you get with that is salt. So what you get when you buy a commercial salt that's white and that flows from the package, you get a sea salt that was sea salt millions of years ago. It's been highly processed, bleached, had things taken out of it, had things put back in it. It tastes like a chemical. And there's no point in buying good ingredients and then having a chemical to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say to my students, I would always say, look, this is my favorite sea salt. You get your favorite sea salt. You know, there's sea salt from Maine, from California, from Oregon, from any coastal region now produces sea salt. Mm-hmm. Get the sea salt you love and use it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes a difference.
Yes, really. And tasting it makes a real difference, because not only will you find that as you said, if you buy something, I've even tasted sea salt that tasted chemically. I mean, just tasted awful.
Right.
But then there's also the difference in terms of the salinity itself, so that you can really understand how much you need to use, because every single sea salt has a different taste to it in terms of how salty it really is.
Absolutely.
And you need to understand that.
Yeah, and what you'll notice is at first you will think sea salt, you might end up using a little more than you would of a commercial salt. I don't know, commercial is not the right word, processed salt. But after a while, you'll get used to the saltiness. And it's a very gentle but acute saltiness. Mm-hmm. But no edge, no bitterness, no acrid flavor. And every class I teach in person, I do a salt tasting. I don't care how many times. Beautiful. Somebody's been to my classes, they do it. And it's amazing when the light bulb goes off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So one other ingredient, because it's something that I think is probably not familiar to most of us. And I'm not going to pronounce it correctly probably, but piment d'Espelette.
Oh, piment d'Espelette. Yes. It's a wonderful ingredient also. And of course, again, I've visited the producers. I've been to the town of Espelette. I have a very fond place in my heart for it, for every reason under the sun. Number one, it's delicious. Number two, it's all tiny producers in a village in the Pays Basque. They fought and fought and fought, and now it has a pedigree so that only peppers from their town, village, can be called piment d'Espelette. It's a red pepper. You can grow it in your garden. You just can't call it piment d'Espelette. But it's not really spicy. It's got a little kick at the end. So what you need to understand about the French palate is the French palate does not appreciate spice or heat. But in the Pays Basque, there is some, and it's from the piment d'Espelette. It's very gentle. Again, you notice it, but mostly you get the flavor. And I use it as seasoning all the time. Mm-hmm.
I want to explore what you just said a little bit about that the French palate doesn't appreciate spice, because another vehicle that you use in the book itself is you tell stories about different aspects. There's the story of the fishmonger, for example. There's the story of why curry with mussels. Well, that's spice, isn't it?
It is, and people are surprised when they find curry in French food. And of course, curry sort of entered through the portal of Brittany. There, I tell the story about they call him a matelot. He was an East Indian on a ship during the spice trade. He brought curry with him. I mean, the spices during the Middle Ages, imagine an anthill. Just imagine an anthill. That was Europe. That was the spice trade. People were running around everywhere, and they were bringing spices from the Indies and taking spices everywhere. Well, this curry ended up in southern Brittany. And this young man taught a pharmacist there how to make his blend of spices, which he called curry. The name was transferred, became Carigos. So when you go to this village in Brittany, you can still buy the Carigos from the pharmacy where 300 years ago, the Indian mariner taught the pharmacist how to make it. So curry powder is also found in salad dressings and, as kind of a complement. But you have to understand, the French went out to colonize. They came back with spices. They came back with flavor. And so they have let certain flavor enter. Most of the curry powder used in France is not spicy. It's just, when I say spice, I mean heat.
Okay.
And when curry powder is used here, let's say it's put in a vinaigrette, let's say a quarter of a teaspoon, a tiny little bit. The Carigos from Brittany, is very, very hot, but it's only used in a tiny little area.
Interesting. Very interesting. Hey, another part of the book that I appreciate is the inclusion of, for example, there's always hints. I forgot the name, the French name. Astuce. Okay. But then there's also places where you go into a little bit more detail. Like, for example, I appreciated all the information about trimming a leek.
Yeah.
I think that's really great. And I wouldn't mind if you'd explain that, but I also have to ask you, could you help me out? Because here's another vegetable that's used a lot in France, shallots.
Yes.
And they're a pain. And I'm sure that I'm not doing it correctly. So I'm sure there's plenty of people who are listening or watching, probably would love, oh yeah, can you tell me how to clean that, the skin off of a shallot too?
Oh man, you guys got to come to Dancing Tomatoes. I understand that. There are a lot of things that are kind of a pain about cooking. That's why I try to explain them. So I'll start with leeks.
Okay.
Now, leeks grow, they're buried in soil, which is why they have a white part at the bottom. So that part doesn't ever see the light of day. And the part that grows out of the soil is the green. And so the soil gets all stuck around in there and it can travel down into the leek. So you really have to wash them. Of course, the fresher they are, the less that happens because they're tight. But anyway, so you cut off the green part, or you leave like 4 inches of green. Then you have to split down the leek lengthwise twice. So you've got, the leek is suddenly in 4 parts, but you leave it attached at the root end.
Okay.
You put it under the running water you're holding onto the root end, and you let that running water flow through it so it washes out all that soil that might be in there. And you have to look at it and you have to make sure it's clean. So and you take off a lot of outer leaves of the leek. The dirtiest ones mostly are the tough ones, and you just get rid of them. But you really have to swish it around in the water and make sure it's clean. And once you do that, you've got a perfectly cleaned leek, and then you can go to town. And the French cook cannot cook without leeks. It's just impossible. It's impossible. We had a freeze about 10 years ago, and the leeks in France were frozen. And there was a show on the TV that showed the French cook how to cook without leeks, because people were just panic stricken. So now the shallot, a shallot comes, it's like a small elongated onion. And there basically often are 2 shallots in one. So you split those. And what's probably a pain is that there's a lot of skin on a shallot. So you leave the skin on, you trim off the stalk end. There's a little stalk end, and you leave the root end attached. You cut the shallot in half and you peel back the first layer or 2 of skin. That's where you see the beautiful purple shallot. And that's what you use. But you leave that skin, you form a handle, and you cut right down. You have to kind of see this, but I've done a video on this. Have we aired it on Dancing Tomatoes yet? If not, it's going to be there. So, because I understand this is a pain. Frankly, onions can be a pain. You got to know how to do it.
Right. That's great. Thank you so much. And I'll be looking forward to that video, if it's not up yet, on Dancing Tomatoes. By the way, I'm talking with Susan Herrmann Loomis, the author of Plat du Jour, French Dinners Made Easy. And now I'm kind of lost in the sense that I have so many more things that I want to talk with you about, and the time is running by. So I'm just going to have to take a stab at certain things, because there's so many recipes that were just they were very, very exciting. I think I got to, before we, wind up, make sure we get into salad niçoise, because this is something that I believe that I'm not unique, that I thought it was one thing, and it's not. So please.
Well, it's not that it's not.
Okay.
It's that I'm looking for the recipe, which of course in the index I can't find. But it's not that it's not a salad niçoise. It's just that there's a protocol for salad niçoise, as in so many French dishes. And, I talk about a protocol because it's what I love about France. There are rules for everything. It is also what can drive you insane about France. Because sometimes the rules aren't followed and sometimes the rules are followed. I mean, don't get me started talking about lettuce, but salad niçoise, there are no green beans. I'm sorry, forget it. There's no lettuce in salad niçoise. No way, you can't do that and call it a salad niçoise. And yet, Auguste Escoffier put a green bean in his salad niçoise, and the world did not stop turning. But a salad niçoise has either fresh tuna, well, really it was always preserved tuna, or anchovies, never both. That is way too much of a good thing. Today, you can add fresh tuna if you can find it. That's allowed. Potatoes are allowed. Different things are allowed. And it's a jumble of these beautiful ingredients, but no green beans and no lettuce. Please.
Mm-hmm. Now, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't digress, but you're making me, you're just getting me there. So, all right. Do you know how it is in other countries? I don't know about France. I'm interested, but you find chefs today doing everything and anything. So they're not bound by the traditions that you're talking about. They're not bound by definitions. They're constantly just pushing boundaries and saying, well, okay, maybe that isn't the way, maybe that's not the rule, but it's, I'm going to do it the way I want to do it. Is that something that's going on among a certain generation of French chefs today, where they're looking at those types of things as confining and they're not going to keep it? They're just not interested in paying attention to it?
It's, of course, people create here all the time. Auguste Escoffier, who is one of my idols, he created, but he did also design the organization of the French kitchen. He was a military person. So the French kitchen is ordered like an army battalion. There's lots of creativity that goes on. And my job as a journalist is to document in certain ways. And when I find that there's a protocol for salad niçoise, I love that. I love that exists. I want to publicize that. I tell you what I find. I tell you, and because I'm kind of a nostalgic and orderly person in certain ways, yeah, don't talk to my kids. But anyway, I love documenting that. And for me, that makes sense to me. I just want to make that salad niçoise that is like people have been making it for hundreds of years with, by the way, what they found in season. That's the reason it's simple. That's where the protocol comes from. Mm-hmm. And somebody wanted to protect this salad so much that they came up with rules for it. Not just a recipe, but rules. So a restaurant serving a salad niçoise, if they're doing it the right way, they get a little plaque. Uh-huh. And that tells their diner, you have a salad niçoise here, it's going to be a real one. Mm-hmm. That said, if you want to add hibiscus flowers to your salad niçoise, and you can make that make sense, whatever, Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you something about the French chef. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the comfort of a plat du jour. It's part of what I love about working and living here. They are trained. They know the basics. They understand the seasons. They grew up here. Their families live on farms. Everybody here is from a farm. Mm-hmm. So when they're experimenting with knowledge, sense, season, place. So they're not going to add a hibiscus flower to a salad niçoise, no matter how trendy it is.
Right. Very, very, very fascinating.
Doesn't mean there isn't creativity here. There's tons of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there are quite a few or a number of potato recipes.
Yes.
In the book. And I think that there are two that I would just like to call attention to. Baptiste's new potato frite because I think it's something that was a very interesting take that people might be, I think people would enjoy hearing about. And then I think I'd be remiss in if you didn't describe perfect mashed potatoes.
Oh. Well, perfect. I'm a Virgo. What can you expect? But let me talk about Baptiste and his potatoes. Baptiste is one of my best friends. He's a farmer, and we call him a market gardener. I met him at the market in the town where I lived when he was 21, and he used to play air guitar because he didn't have very many customers. Now he is the most famous farmer for kilometers, for decades, because he figured out how to, he has great soil, for one thing, on his farm, and he just knows how to market his vegetables. So he loves to cook. He is part of a wine group that I started. He came to my house all the time, and he takes these new potatoes, cuts them in little rounds, blanches them, and then puts them in the oven with a little bit of olive oil and some salt, and they come out like the best frite that you can imagine. They're round, but they're new potato frites, and they're unbelievable. So I highly recommend them. Now, in terms of the perfect mashed potatoes, everybody's definition of perfect is different, but my perfect mashed potatoes have creme fraiche in them. So creme fraiche is top cream. It's when the milk comes from the cow, it sits, the cream rises to the top, but there are two levels, and that very, very top level, the thickest, gets skimmed off, and that's creme fraiche. So my potatoes have, you can imagine, a bay leaf when they cook. And then they get, then I cook them, and you have to use very starchy potatoes. Cook them just until they're cooked, and then you mash them with creme fraiche and butter. So you've got the essence of the bay leaf, the incredible potatoes from, my favorite potatoes come from Betty's farm, but you'll have your farmer. You add butter, you add creme fraiche. I add a little nutmeg, which is a very French spice to add with potatoes, by the way. So you make a potato gratin, you often add a little bit of nutmeg. These, for your next meal when you're making mashed potatoes, they're simple. They're incredibly luscious. And I'm not adding 800 tons of butter or cream, just enough.
Okay. Now, it's not very easy, I don't think, to find creme fraiche on the shelves in the States, but I think you can make it pretty easily at home. Is that acceptable to use homemade creme fraiche?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I realize I don't have a recipe in this book. In the French Farmhouse Cookbook, I definitely have a recipe. In fact, most of my books have a recipe for it, and it's buttermilk and whole milk that you just really let sit for 24 hours, maybe 36 in a warm spot. And when you're done, you have creme fraiche. And it works really well. I think creme fraiche is relatively easy to find in the grocery store, though, in the US. No?
Maybe it is. I live in a small town. I live in a small town, so maybe it is.
Not just any grocery store, I have to admit. You might have to go to, Wegmans, Whole Foods. I don't know if Trader Joe's has it. It is available.
Right.
There are several companies, one in Vermont specifically.
But you just told us how easy it is to make it at home. So I mean, it's very simple.
And for the thing about, we used to just say use sour cream. Sour cream's a little sour. Creme fraiche is really not sour.
Right. And I think it's also important, you have to use, for lack of a better word, real buttermilk. I mean, a lot of stores, they carry this buttermilk that's, I don't know what it is. It's not buttermilk. So you have to make sure you find somebody who's got real buttermilk.
But, the other thing you also can use as a substitute for creme fraiche in this recipe is heavy cream.
Oh, okay. That's easy.
You can. And oftentimes even, that's a very good substitute, because the kind of creme fraiche I'm talking about is thick, like clotted cream. So heavy whipping cream has a very similar dairy flavor.
Nice. I want to make sure that we get to before we run out of time, and that is there was an ingredient in your chocolate mousse that I was really fascinated with, and that was you said, I use salted butter.
Yes. Well, I got the recipe in Brittany. Brittany is the only region in France that produces salted butter. And there is a historic reason for that has to do with the salt tax, salt production, etc. But when you go to Brittany, all the butter is salted. Weirdly. But that's because they never had to pay tax on salt. So they make chocolate mousse there. Not everybody, but I got a fabulous recipe for chocolate mousse that uses salted butter. And, it's a wonderful thing. Now today people are adding fleur de sel to chocolate tarts and chocolate cookies and sprinkling salt everywhere. This is a tried and true family recipe, and you should try it. It is really wonderful.
It's funny because now I start thinking to myself, wow, one of the things that Susan mentions a lot is how much the French are in love with eggs. And of course, there's eggs in chocolate mousse, and there's eggs in many of the recipes. And it's something that is, for me, I'm so particular about eggs. I can't even get eggs 6 months of the year because the farm that I get them from, his hens don't seem to be very, very interested once daylight starts to go down and it starts getting cooler, and they don't seem to be very quick at getting back to production either. So it's like, once you had those kind of eggs, which you probably are used to having the ability to use every day, these wonderful fresh eggs from that are so rich and delicious. And here again, it's tough. So I appreciate the attention that you've given to talking to people about establishing a relationship with their farmers so that they can get just these great ingredients, especially going to the farmer's market and finding somebody who, whose chickens produce eggs that are, rich and flavorful as opposed to just watery and whatever.
Well, the French are in love with eggs. And, I've got a recipe in here for a very simple omelet of wild mushroom and potato. You can use a cultivated mushroom, but when you learn to make a simple omelet, and there is a technique to it, with a beautiful egg, it is the best meal on earth. And yes, I have eggs, gorgeous eggs, but I'm always looking for a better egg. It's like I'm always excited to find to try someone's eggs when they have their eggs at the market. Mm-hmm. And speaking of the market, we must have farms. We have to have farms in this planet. And so it is up to us to try to help that happen, keep those people on the land. And the plat du jour, the recipes in this book, they're very, very, very much issue of the farm in France. And I think that people will find, they'll find old friends recipes here, but they'll find lots of new creative things. And I wanted to bring up that, I talked about the recipe of monkfish with white beans. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it's from a restaurant, a lovely, very trendy restaurant. And I know the chef. We were talking one day and I said, well, what's your plat du jour today? And he said, well, I was going to do lamb with white beans. That's very traditional combination. And he said, I got to thinking, why couldn't I do monkfish with white beans? So he tried it and it was fabulous. And I thought, now that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That's a traditional idea made with a non-traditional ingredient that is very sensical. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of ideas like that in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. And the thing that stands out to me, one of the things that stands out to me is just that the book itself is so full of this substance of place, this substance of sustainability, this substance of the immediacy of good food being available, and your entire thought process that you just communicated about how critical farms are is a message that I hope not only, I'm sure it resonates with people, but people understand how serious a message it is, because it's something that we all face anywhere. It's not just in the United States. It's not just in France. It's everywhere around the world. The industrialization of agriculture and the fact that we are continually losing not only farms, but we're losing these flavors and these vegetables that have sustained us for thousands of years.
Well, and part of my job is to make sure that doesn't happen. And that is my message. And I think as we lose farms, we also gain a lot. And Baptiste is a young farmer, and I've written about him for the New York Times. I've done everything I can think of, to get the word out, because he's a young man who took over his family farm. He has a life, he has a wife, he has a kid, and he gets to take a vacation every year. He's got a life, and he makes very decent money. And I'm thinking, he's my model. He's the present and the future. Farmers need to have a life. They need to make money. They need to have what we all have. And if I could wave a magic wand over this planet, it would be to put more people back on the farm who want to be there, who want to live that lifestyle, but who have a life that allows them to have a life.
Sure, absolutely. All right, back to the recipes. Bathed bread. That's a sandwich.
Oh, pan bagna. Oh, I love it.
I mean, please. I mean, it's like, wow, you just opened my eyes to something that I would never have dreamed of. It's just amazing.
Well, pan bagna is another recipe with rules, right? So it's a sandwich from Nice. So, and it's kind of like the culinary flag of Nice. And the whole Côte d'Azur. It's a big old hamburger bun, but it's not filled with hamburger. It's filled with vegetables and olives and artichokes and tomatoes, and it's like a salad on a bun. And there are all kinds of rules for making it. And I'm looking for the page of the rules, because there's actually a society dedicated to the pan bagna, as there is to the salade niçoise.
Right.
People take this very seriously.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And if you belong to that society and you go to the meetings, you wear a special outfit, you have a special hat, you name it. But the rules for pan bagna, there's an official list of ingredients.
Okay.
Bread, tomatoes, radishes, scallions, preferred but small onions are tolerated, bell pepper, tuna or anchovies, hard-cooked egg, olive oil, salt and pepper, fava beans, small artichokes, vinegar, tolerated.
Tolerated.
So I have to tell you, this is my editor's favorite picture in the whole book, is of pan bagna.
Now, is it a specific type of bun?
Well, I actually give the recipe for making the bread, because it is. It's really a plate-sized bun. So a hamburger bun won't work. So you make your own yummy, it's white dough, wonderful. And you just cram it full of all these yummy vegetables, and then you drizzle with olive oil. So the olive oil soaks into the bread. And then you try to figure out how you're going to eat it. So you have to put your foot on it to eat it, but it's wonderful.
So if we have to go by seasonality, I guess that sandwich can't be made more than 3 months out of the year or something like that.
Ideally, although seasons are changing. Like the radish season used to be May, June. We now have wonderful radishes all the way to September. They come from the farm. So, you've got to understand that botanists are constantly tinkering.
Sure.
And some of it may be genetic modification, which I hope not. A lot of it is just, okay, well, how can we take this radish and make it extend the season? Same with strawberries.
Right.
Their season is much longer than it used to be. Tomatoes.
Yes, but there is the seasons are long, but the time that they have that beautiful, perfect taste is still short, I think. Right.
So a pan bagna, you're not even going to think about a pan bagna until tomatoes are ripe. Now, for me, that's not till July.
Yeah. I love there are chefs that I know, for example, one that I'm thinking of in particular. He never has a recipe. He never has a dish on his menu that has tomatoes in it, unless it's a tomato that he's using it for sauce or something, But fresh tomato until August, where he's at. He never does. Right.
And of course we all get excited about the tomato. I mean, that's one thing about living and cooking in France is the seasons are very well demarcated. Not that you can't go to a huge grocery store and get anything you want any time of year, but why would you? You haunt the markets the way I do.
Right.
And yes, I'm dying for a tomato in June. I'm dying for one, but I don't want to eat an ersatz weird old tomato from Peru.
Right.
I want to wait until I get the tomato. It's worth waiting for.
Yeah.
That said, the cherry tomato. Now there's a vegetable with a long season.
Yes.
And we get those, local is a big word, but we can get fabulous cherry tomatoes from Brittany quite early on in the season.
Nice.
From a farm.
Thank you so much, Susan. It has been such a pleasure. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience with? Well,
I hope you'll enjoy this, and I hope you'll get the book and share and encourage your friends to get Plat du Jour. It's like all my books, it's a labor of love that I do for you. And I would like to invite you all to visit me at dancingtomatoes.com. And
cannot wait
so much.
Cannot wait to hit dancingtomatoes.com, honestly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Susan Herrmann Loomis, author of Plat du Jour, French Dinners Made Easy. You've been listening to and watching us on Great Taste, and I have 3 little words just to leave you with. Eat with joy.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Susan. It was totally awesome talking with you.
Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.